A single trembling piano note lingered in the vast Warsaw concert hall, an echo suspended like a dying heartbeat. Moments earlier, Maestro Adrian Lewandowski, Europe's most celebrated pianist, had raised his hands for the final crescendo. Instead, he collapsed across the piano keys, producing that haunting dissonant chord that now seemed to accuse the silent audience. Panic erupted. Ushers screamed. Someone swore they saw a shadow slip behind the curtains. And in the chaos, a calm voice rose above the shouts. Chapter 1. The Death That Played Itself. The Warsaw Concert Hall shimmered like a jewel against the late winter dusk, its grand facade rising proudly over the cobbled square where carriages and motor cars mingled in a dance of old and new. Lanterns gleamed against frost-kissed windows, and the faint hum of excitement spread through the bundling crowds. Tonight was no ordinary performance. It was the triumphant return of Adrian Lewandowski, Poland's beloved virtuoso pianist, whose hands were rumoured to possess both the fire of rebellion and the fragility of a dream. Tickets had sold out in minutes. Newspapers declared this night a cultural resurrection. And throughout Warsaw, whispers grew. Adrian's final composition, never performed publicly, would at last meet the world. Inside the hall, chandeliers blazed with warm light, scattering reflections across brocaded balconies and velvet curtains. The scent of polished wood, perfume, and anticipation blended into a heady perfume. Gentle murmurs cascaded through the audience as guests in evening coats and shimmering gowns took their seats. The orchestra pit was empty. Tonight's spotlight belonged solely to the piano, a magnificent ebony Steinway resting at the center of the stage like a slumbering beast awaiting its master. Behind the stage, concealed within the labyrinth of narrow corridors, dressing rooms, and rehearsal chambers, Hercule Poirot stood surveying the fluttering movements of musicians and attendants. He had not come as a guest of luxury, nor as a critic of music. A discreet telegram arriving only hours earlier had summoned him. It bore no signature, only a single line: "Attend the performance, something grave will occur." Poirot, being Poirot, had immediately rearranged his evening plans. He adjusted his immaculate moustache while contemplating the character of the note. Anonymous warnings were rarely so precise. They were either desperate cries or dangerous games. And Poirot had learned, through long and varied experience, that intrigue often disguised itself beneath elegance and opera gloves. He emerged near the stage curtains just in time to observe the hall manager, Marcel Noack, bustling nervously between performers. Marcel was a short, sweating man, his round spectacles slipping repeatedly down his nose. His usual composure had abandoned him tonight, and Poirot could see clearly the tremor in his hand as he checked the tuning of the piano one last time. Marcel noticed Poirot's presence and hurried over. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered urgently, I am relieved you are here, though I pray the note you received was some cruel prank." Poirot raised one eyebrow. "You knew of the telegram?" Marcel's eyes widened. "I did not, but if someone summoned you here, I feared trouble. Adrian has been tense, unusually so. And earlier today, he dismissed several members of the staff from his dressing room. He claimed he needed complete silence, but—" Marcel hesitated. "His wife believes someone threatened him." Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "Threats, you say? Yet he performs tonight as scheduled. The temperament of the artist is a curious thing." Marcel nodded anxiously. "You will watch, yes? Just in case?" Poirot gave a small bow. "But of course, and if something does occur, I shall be most attentive." Before Marcel could respond, the lights flickered twice, signal of the performance's commencement. A hush swept the hall as the audience settled into place. Poirot moved silently to a discreet vantage point near the curtains, where he could observe both the stage and the wings. The stage darkened. From the shadows, Adrian Lewandowski emerged. Tall, elegant, possessing the quiet poise of a man who lived through the keys of an instrument rather than through the world, Adrian walked toward the piano with a composure bordering on divine detachment. His dark hair reflected the soft glow of footlights, and his coat, black velvet, rustled like whispers from an old tragedy. A ripple of awe moved through the crowd. Even Poirot felt the atmosphere shift, as though every breath had synchronized in anticipation. Adrian bowed, gracefully, humbly. His eyes scanned the audience, pausing briefly in the third row, where his wife, Elena Lewandowska, sat adorned in silver satin. Her posture was stiff, her expression unreadable. Poirot noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her gloved fingers knotted together as if bound by invisible restraints. Adrian turned to the piano. The hall held its breath. He lifted the piano lid with a quiet reverence and took his seat. His fingers hovered above the ivory keys, trembling with the restless energy of a man who carried symphonies within his bones. For several seconds, he remained motionless. Then, with a faint exhale, he began to play. The first notes unfurled like silk, soft, haunting, almost mournful. A melody born of longing and confession. The audience leaned forward, enthralled. Poirot felt a shiver as the composition deepened, shifting into darker, storm-laden passages. Adrian's entire body swayed with the music, the passion consuming him, his hands racing, leaping, striking the keys with ferocious delicacy. Yet, amid the brilliance, Poirot's gaze drifted beyond the pianist. Something was wrong. A figure, no more than a shadow, slipped briefly behind the stage backdrop. A soft metallic clink echoed. Poirot narrowed his eyes. He strained to listen between the storm of music, and for a moment he detected the faintest hiss, like the winding of a mechanism. Adrian leaned closer to the keys, his expression twisted in concentration. The melody reached its apex. His right hand darted forward for the climactic final chord, and he froze. A shudder coursed through him. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened silently. Poirot straightened, his breath halting. Adrian's body convulsed. A horrifying, discordant chord thundered through the hall as his arm crashed violently across the keys. Gasps erupted from the audience. Adrian collapsed sideways, half slumped over the piano, fingers spasming once, twice, before going still. The final vibrating note echoed through the hall like a heartbeat fading into death. A woman screamed. Poirot moved instantly. Rushing onto the stage, he gently lifted Adrian's head. The pianist's skin was pale, his lips tinged blue. Poirot pressed 2 fingers to his neck. No pulse. He inhaled sharply. Almonds. A hint of bitter almond on the breath. "Cyanide," he whispered. Chaos exploded around him. Elena rushed forward, shrieking her husband's name. Ushers attempted to calm the panicking audience. Marcel stumbled onto the stage, his face blotched with panic. Poirot raised his voice, firm yet composed. "Mesdames et messieurs, please remain seated. This is now a matter of grave importance. No one leaves the hall." Elena collapsed onto her knees beside her husband, clutching his limp hand. "Adrian! Adrian, please, wake up!" Poirot touched her shoulder gently. "Madame, I am deeply sorry, but your husband, he is gone." She stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief, mouth trembling. No, no, this cannot be. Poirot turned to Marcel. Lock the main exits and summon the police immediately, and send someone to guard the backstage corridor. Marcel nodded, though his legs shook. Poirot returned his attention to the body. Cyanide poisoning acted rapidly, but the sudden collapse suggested more than ingestion. Something mechanical, something precise. He crouched, scanning the bench. A small tear in the velvet, and beneath it, a thin metallic wire, coiled tightly, almost invisible. Interesting, Poirot murmured. He followed the wire downward and found it connected to a small mechanism beneath the bench. A device. Poirot recognized the craftsmanship at once. Ingenious, deadly, a timed trigger designed to release poison at a specific moment. Impossible for Adrian to detect. Perfect for an assassin. He stood surveying the hall. A murderer had been among them moments ago. Perhaps still was. Then a cry pierced the air from backstage. Poirot spun towards the sound. A young usher rushed through the curtains, face white as snow. "Monsieur Poirot, someone has found something terrible." "What is it?" Poirot demanded. The usher trembled. "A message, sir, written in the rehearsal room." Poirot followed him, heart quickening. The rehearsal room was dimly lit, shadows stretching like accusing fingers across the walls. On the mirror above the piano, someone had scrawled a message in thick black ink. "Tonight, the final note plays." Poirot examined the writing. The strokes were quick, hurried, uneven. But the placement, on the mirror where Adrian always warmed his hands, was intentional. Elena appeared in the doorway, breathless, tears streaking her cheeks. "What does it mean?" she whispered. Poirot stepped toward her. "It means, madame, that this murder was planned well in advance, and the assassin wished to send a message." She clasped her hands together. "Who would do this?" Poirot studied her face, the tremor in her voice, the swelling grief. "That, Madame Lewandowska," he replied softly, "is what we must discover. But first, may I ask you something?" She nodded weakly. "In the front row during the performance, did you see anyone approach the stage, anyone behaving unusually?" Her brow creased. I don't know. Everything happened so quickly. I remember hearing something, a faint ticking maybe, but I thought it was part of the music." Poirot's mind raced. Ticking, a mechanical device. Adrian leaning forward, the collapse. Then he saw it. On the floor near the bench lay a tiny metal cylinder, barely noticeable. Poirot picked it up with his handkerchief. A hollow needle. The murder device had been more elaborate than he imagined. Poirot stood tall, eyes sharp. "A killer," he said quietly, "has composed a symphony of death." Elena closed her eyes, trembling. Poirot looked around the room once more. The note, the device, the timing, the anonymous telegram. There were too many moving pieces for an impulsive act. This was orchestration. Poirot stepped into the hallway. "Marcel," he called, "gather everyone remaining in the building. We shall begin interviews immediately." Marcel nodded frantically and disappeared down the corridor. Poirot remained in the doorway of the rehearsal room, his silhouette cutting a clean outline against the flickering lights. He took one long, deliberate breath. "Let us begin," he whispered. Chapter 2. Suspects in the Shadows. The heavy doors of the Warsaw Concert Hall groaned shut with a final, echoing thud as Marcel Nowak hurried across the lobby, turning the brass keys with trembling fingers. Outside, a restless crowd of ticket holders pressed against the glass, demanding answers. But Marcel did not dare open the door. Not until Poirot instructed otherwise. Inside, the hall felt transformed, less a beacon of art and culture, and more a cage sealing the guilty among the innocent. The velvet seats, the gilded balconies, the soft glow of chandeliers, all appeared sinister in the aftermath of death. A murder had occurred amid beauty, staining the night with dread. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the orchestra pit, surveying the silent hall. The body of Adrian Lewandowski had been respectfully removed to a private chamber, though the shock of his final chord still hung in the air like smoke. Poirot's eyes moved slowly, meticulously over the faces of the remaining attendees, musicians, attendants, backstage workers, technicians, and a few guests who had not yet departed. All were nervous, whispering, clutching their coats. All were potential suspects. Poirot cleared his throat gently. Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for your patience. The police are on their way. Until then, I shall begin with a few questions. I assure you, this is for everyone's safety. A murmur passed through the group. Poirot raised one hand and allowed silence to settle. Though soft-spoken, his presence held authority. He began with Elena Lewandowska, who stood apart from the others, a fragile figure in her silver gown, face pale, eyes red from weeping. She looked less like a grieving widow, and more like a woman caught between mourning and terror. Madame, Poirot said gently, we must speak in private if you are able. She nodded wordlessly. Poirot led her to a small chamber behind the stage, a dressing room where the faint scent of powder and roses lingered. A lone lamp illuminated her trembling form. She sank into a chair, clutching a silk handkerchief. Poirot began softly. Madame, can you tell me, were there any recent quarrels between you and your husband? Her head snapped up, startled. Quarrels? No, I mean, Adrian was under pressure, yes, but we did not fight. He was nervous about tonight's performance. That is all. Poirot studied her face. You seemed anxious during the concert. She swallowed hard, because he seemed strange. He told me earlier that if anything went wrong tonight, I must trust that he had done all he could. I asked him what he meant, but he brushed me aside. Adrian never hid things from me before. Poirot leaned forward. Did anyone threaten him? Anyone he feared? Elena hesitated, gripping the handkerchief so tightly it nearly tore. There was one man, she whispered, a violinist, Marek Zielinski. They had argued last week, something about a stolen composition. Adrian claimed Marek intended to ruin his career. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A motive, perhaps? He thanked her and stepped back into the hallway, where Marcel Nowak waited nervously. Marcel, Poirot said, please find Monsieur Marek Zielinski. I wish to speak with him. Marcel hurried away. Poirot continued his slow, deliberate march toward the rehearsal wing. Footsteps, voices, and whispers filled the air like scattered restless spirits. Everyone sensed the danger, yet remained unsure where it lurked. He paused when he reached the side corridor where the strange ticking sound had been heard earlier. The floorboards were lightly dusted with chalk from stage scenery. Poirot crouched, noticing faint footprints. Small, narrow, likely a woman's, in the dust leading to the backstage curtain. Another set, larger, heavier, crossed these tracks. Poirot filed this away. As he stood, a voice behind him cracked sharply. Monsieur Poirot! He turned to see a tall, stern-looking man with a violin case slung over his shoulder. His sable hair was dishevelled, his dark eyes intense. This was Marek Zielinski, the musician Elena had named. Before Poirot could speak, Marek burst forward. I did not kill Adrian. I swear it. They said you were asking for me. I came at once. Poirot lifted a calming hand. Monsieur Zielinski, I have accused no one. Please, let us discuss the matter rationally." Marek struggled to control his breathing, then nodded stiffly. Poirot gestured for him to step aside into a quieter corner. "Tell me," Poirot began, "Madame Lewandowska has suggested that you and Adrian argued?" Marek clenched his jaw. "Yes, we argued, but I did not harm him." "And the subject of this argument?" Marek closed his eyes briefly. "A composition, a piano concerto Adrian claimed he wrote alone. But the truth is, we collaborated many months ago. The theme for the second movement, it was mine." He thumped his chest. "My melody. Adrian promised he would credit me. But when he sent the piece to the publisher, my name was gone." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You confronted him?" "Of course. I demanded acknowledgement, but Adrian was stubborn. He said I was mistaken, that my memory was playing tricks. He humiliated me, even in front of others." Marek's voice darkened with bitterness. Poirot's tone remained calm. "Monsieur, did you threaten him?" Marek hesitated. "I may have said things in anger, but I would never poison him." Poirot's gaze lingered on the violin case. Marek noticed and opened it. "Only my violin," he muttered. "See for yourself." Poirot inspected the contents. Beau Rosin, sheet music, nothing unusual. Yet Marek's agitation was undeniable. "Very well," Poirot said finally. "You may wait with the others." Marek left, shoulders stiff, anger simmering beneath his grief. Poirot moved on. His next interview was with Alicia Brozovska, Adrian's personal assistant. She was a young woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She stood backstage surrounded by scattered sheet music and scribbled notes. "Poirot," she said coolly, without waiting for an introduction, "I assume you want to know if I killed him." Poirot blinked, mildly amused. "Madame, I would simply like to understand the events leading up to tonight." She sighed heavily. "Adrian was brilliant, too brilliant for his own good. He expected perfection. I organized his schedules, handled his publishers, soothed his temper tantrums, but lately he was impossible." Poirot asked, "Impossible in what way?" Alicia tapped her fingers nervously. "He believed someone was sabotaging him. He said he felt watched. He even changed the locks on his music room. And today he refused to let me near the piano before the performance." Poirot leaned forward. "Did he tell you why?" "No, but he seemed frightened." Poirot considered this. "Did he suspect anyone?" Alicia's eyes shifted away. "Adrian had many admirers and many enemies. Fame doesn't come without a price." "Did he argue with anyone today?" Poirot pressed. Alicia paused. "Yes, his wife." Poirot stiffened slightly. "Elena?" Alicia nodded. "They were shouting in his dressing room, something about his will. He said he wanted to make changes. She told him he was being reckless." Poirot felt the pieces slowly adjusting, falling into place, though not yet forming a coherent picture. He thanked Alicia and returned toward the stage. The stage itself had changed. Once alive with music, it now sat in eerie stillness. The Steinway stood alone, its glossy surface reflecting the ghostly sheen of the overhead lights. Poirot approached it slowly, studying the bench once more. His gloved fingers traced the faint tear in the velvet. He peered underneath. The mechanism was still in place, a delicate contraption wired to release cyanide gas triggered by weight and movement. Ingenious, precise, deadly. He examined the keys where Adrian had slumped. A faint residue, perhaps perspiration, mixed with traces of metal, clung to the edge. Poirot stepped back. Why poison? Why a timed mechanical device? Why the theatrical message on the mirror? The killer knew Adrian's habits intimately, knew he leaned forward at the concerto's climax, knew exactly when to activate the mechanism. This was no impulsive act. Poirot turned sharply as Marcel rushed toward him, Monsieur Poirot, there is someone else who requests to speak with you, a special guest, an acquaintance of the victim. Poirot nodded. Bring them. Marcel ushered forward a tall, elegantly dressed man with a calm, almost icy composure. His dark suit fit flawlessly, and his silver hair glinted beneath the lights. His eyes, a piercing grey, held no fear, only calculation. He introduced himself with a bow. Viktor Sobieski, a patron of the arts. Adrian and I were business associates. Poirot examined him carefully. Business, monsieur? Do you refer to sponsorship? Victor's smile was faint, cold. In a sense, Adrian owed me money, a considerable amount. His concerts generated profit. His talent was undeniable, but he gambled with opportunities. He promised me he would repay his debt after tonight's performance. Poirot's interest sharpened. And did he seem prepared to do so? Victor's gaze hardened. Adrian was talented, but not reliable. He avoided responsibility. I was patient, but my patience was nearing its end. Poirot tilted his head. Monsieur Sobieski, were you aware that Adrian feared someone meant him harm? Victor smirked. Adrian feared many things. Ghosts of his own making, mostly. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. And where were you seated during the performance? Row 2, in clear view of the stage. Did you leave your seat at any time? No, Victor said smoothly. Too smoothly. Poirot filed this away. A wealthy patron with financial motives, cold nature, controlled answers, curious. He dismissed Victor with a polite nod. Poirot found himself drawn once more to the rehearsal room, where the ominous message lingered on the mirror. Tonight, the final note plays. He studied the handwriting again, rapid, agitated, not elegant, not calculated, a message written in haste, but by whom? He noticed something beneath the mirror, a single torn page from sheet music. It bore a scribbled line. He knows. Poirot's pulse quickened. If Adrian knew he was being targeted, why not flee? Why perform? Unless he believed he could expose his enemy. Poirot suddenly felt a chill. Adrian's final composition, had he encoded something within its notes? A clue, a secret. The theory danced at the edge of Poirot's mind when a sudden crash echoed from down the hall. He rushed toward the sound. There he found a stagehand, Piotr Grzelak on his knees, trembling violently, a toolbox spilled beside him. Poirot approached. What has happened, monsieur? Piotr's lips quivered. I found something. Behind the stage paneling, a small box, with wires. I thought it was dangerous. I grabbed it, but it slipped. Poirot knelt beside him. Where is the box now? Piotr pointed shakily to the shadows. Poirot retrieved it carefully using a cloth. It was a second mechanism, similar in design to the one under Adrian's bench, but this one had not been activated. Poirot held it close to the light. Inside was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. 4 words stared back at him. This is only beginning. Poirot's eyes widened. A second device, a second threat, a warning, or perhaps a promise, that the murderer intended more than one death. He rose to his feet, his mind racing. This was bigger than vengeance, bigger than rivalry. This was a campaign, a grand performance of murder. And they were still in Act 1. Poirot inhaled deeply. Someone in this hall, he whispered, intends to strike again. As he turned back toward the silent stage, the chandeliers flickered ominously overhead, like an unseen conductor raising his baton for the next movement of this deadly symphony. Chapter 3. The silent corridor. The next morning arrived beneath a sky of dull pewter, the winter sun refusing to pierce the thick clouds hanging above Warsaw. Poirot awoke early, sharply refreshed. his mind like a perfectly polished instrument ready to perform. Hastings, still yawning and muttering about draughty hotel windows, followed him downstairs where a modest breakfast waited. Poirot ate sparingly, sipping hot chocolate and rearranging the cutlery into immaculate symmetry. The precision calmed him, for last night's performance had left an unsettling discord in his little grey cells. A man as disciplined as Maestro Lewandowski did not simply collapse on the final note of a triumphant concert. No, there was intention behind it, whether his own or that of a hidden hand. By 9 o'clock, they were already walking through the backstage corridor of the Warsaw Concert Hall, the scent of old wood, brass polish, and faint perfume lingering as though the evening's audience had only recently departed. Poirot paused, listening to the silence, his gaze drifting to the scuffed edges of the stage door. "Hastings, mon ami," he murmured, "a crime leaves behind an echo, not always visible, but perceptible to the senses. Let us observe the echoes here." Inspector Jaworski joined them shortly after, coat collar raised and moustache trembling with suppressed irritation. "Monsieur Poirot, I hope your early enthusiasm leads to answers. My department is drowning in telegrams from the press. A world-famous composer dies in our concert hall, and everyone believes he was murdered." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And you, Inspector? Do you believe it?" Jaworski hesitated. There was poison in his system, enough to stop his heart. But how and when? That is what troubles me. "Let us trouble ourselves together," Poirot replied gently. "Show me the dressing room." Lewandowski's private dressing chamber was small but elegant. Dark mahogany furniture, velvet curtains, and a large mirror framed with golden bulbs, now dim and cold. Poirot's eyes went immediately to the grand upholstered chair in which the maestro had been found slumped after the performance. He approached it with reverence, bending slightly to examine the fabric. A faint discoloration rested along the armrest. A small patch, hardly visible unless inspected closely. Poirot touched it lightly, then smelled his fingertip. "Ah," he said quietly, "this fragrance? Subtle, floral, almost too gentle. Not a man's cologne." Hastings leaned forward. "Perfume, perhaps?" "Oui, but not the kind worn for one's pleasure. This scent, it is masking something, a stronger chemical beneath it." Jaworski frowned. "You believe this is linked to the poison?" "I believe," Poirot said, straightening, "that someone attempted to disguise an odour left behind by their method." He turned to the dressing table. There, beside a stack of sheet music, lay a crystal glass with a faint ring of residue inside. Poirot lifted it with a handkerchief. "This," he whispered, "was not here by accident. The maestro was known for drinking only water before a performance. Who brought him this drink, and who ensured he would take it?" Jaworski sighed. "We questioned the staff. Everyone claims he asked for nothing except quiet." "Such devotion to silence," Poirot mused, "and yet he was disturbed. Someone came here before the final act. Someone who had both motive and opportunity." His eyes drifted to the mirror, its surface slightly smudged, as though someone had leaned close, perhaps arguing, perhaps whispering threats. Poirot studied the items atop the dressing table, piles of correspondence, concert invitations, and a small locked drawer. "May I?" he asked. Jaworski produced a thin metal pick and opened the drawer with surprising skill. Inside were 3 items: a torn piece of sheet music, an unsigned letter, and a broken metronome arm. Poirot lifted the letter first. The handwriting was elegant, yet trembling. You cannot keep running from the past. What you owe will be paid, one way or another." Hastings exhaled sharply. "Good heavens, a threat!" Poirot nodded. "And unsigned, how unimaginative. But the paper, Inspector, where do you suppose one finds stationery embossed with this pattern?" He handed it to Jaworski. Jaworski stared. This is from the Royal Warsaw Suites, where both Madame Elżbieta and Maestro Korecki are residing," Poirot said softly. Hastings swallowed. "So one of them might have sent it? Or someone else staying in the same hotel," Poirot added. "The web becomes more intricate." Poirot then inspected the torn sheet music. Written in Lewandowski's own style, it was the first bar of an unfinished composition, something haunting, almost mournful. Yet the tearing was violent, uneven. The maestro had been frustrated, or someone had attempted to destroy his work. The broken metronome arm, too, was peculiar, snapped cleanly, not worn or cracked. Poirot arranged the items carefully in a row. "Hastings," he said, "picture the scene. A man prepares for the final act of a legendary performance. He is tense, perhaps fearful. A visitor enters, someone he knows or someone he does not see as a threat. A confrontation occurs. A drink is offered, poisoned, a perfume used to mask the trace, a letter delivered earlier, now fueling his anxiety." Hastings shivered. Sounds like someone wanted him terrified before he died. Poirot looked at the mirror again. "And fear, my friend, produces confusion. Confusion leads to mistakes, and mistakes reveal the truth." Suddenly, Poirot knelt beside the dressing table, eyes narrowing. "Aha! Voila!" He pointed to a faint scratch along the floorboard, its pattern curved and sharp-edged. "This is not from furniture," he said. "It is from a shoe, a heel perhaps. But not the maestro's. His shoes had soft bottoms. This came from a woman's heel, a tall pair." Hastings blinked. Elżbieta? Perhaps, but any woman of refined upbringing in Warsaw may wear such shoes. Poirot rose smoothly. "Still, it is a detail. And in the murder of an artist, every detail is a note within the larger symphony." Jaworski folded his arms. "Poirot, are you suggesting the visitor was a woman?" Poirot tilted his head. "I'm suggesting that the corridor outside this room holds more secrets than we have yet uncovered. Come." They stepped into the long, narrow passageway behind the stage. The air felt colder, as though the walls had absorbed the echoes of whispered conversations over the decades. Poirot walked slowly, inspecting every door, every crack, every scuff along the baseboards. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped. "Look here," he murmured. A small scrap of fabric, red, delicate, expensive, was caught in a splinter of wood. Poirot extracted it with tweezers. "Silk," he said, "from a dress of high quality, and this particular shade of crimson. Hastings, who wore this last night?" "Elżbieta," Hastings replied immediately. "She had that red gown with the embroidered neckline." "Just so," Poirot said, "but let us not rush to conclusions. Motives must be weighed carefully." Jaworski scribbled in his notebook. "So she was here, or someone dressed like her." "Exactly," Poirot said. "An imitation can be a very powerful deception." They moved further down until Poirot reached the end of the corridor. There, beneath a dim bulb, he crouched again. A faint smear of powder, white, fine as dust, marked the floor. Poirot touched it lightly, rubbing it between his fingers. "Poison?" Hastings asked. Poirot shook his head. "No, chalk, the kind used to mark stage positions. But look." He pointed to the pattern. An unmistakable footprint had smudged the chalk. A single footprint, leading into the darkness beyond the service door. A footprint that did not match any shoe they had yet seen. "A new player enters the composition," Poirot murmured. "Someone moving quietly, someone backstage who knew where to hide." Hastings swallowed. so the killer may not be one of the obvious suspects." Poirot rose slowly, eyes gleaming. "My friend, in a murder of music, the killer is rarely the one playing the loudest note. It is the one who plays in silence." As they stood in that quiet corridor, Poirot turned to Jaworski. "Inspector, from this moment forward, no one enters or exits this backstage area without my knowledge. The clues, the very heartbeat of this mystery, are here, and the truth will reveal itself only if we listen closely to the silent spaces." The corridor lights flickered, as though echoing the tension that now hung in the air. Poirot adjusted his tie. "The concert has ended, Hastings, but the true performance has only just begun." Chapter 4. Shadows in the hotel suite. The Royal Warsaw Suites rose like a monument of marble and polished glass against the grey winter sky, its facade reflecting the city's slow morning bustle. Poirot and Hastings arrived shortly after noon, their breath visible in the bitter air as they stepped into the warm, opulent lobby. A grand chandelier flickered overhead, its crystals capturing the faint golden light, while plush carpets muffled their steps. Poirot paused to take in the atmosphere. Every detail mattered. "Here," he murmured, "we shall find the emotional fingerprints of our suspects. People hide their secrets at home, or where they temporarily call home." Hastings nodded, though his gaze wandered toward the aroma of fresh pastries wafting from the hotel café. Poirot gently tugged his sleeve. "Later, Hastings. First the truth." Inspector Jaworski was already waiting near the lift, hands clasped behind his back, impatience thinly veiled. "Monsieur Poirot, we have arranged access to both suites, Madame Elzbieta's and Maestro Korecki's. They are aware you are investigating, but are not expecting interrogation today." A subtle smile curved Poirot's lips. "Excellent, for a mind under no suspicion speaks more freely." They entered the lift, ascending to the 5th floor, where a plush corridor stretched in elegant silence. Elzbieta's suite was first. When she opened the door, Elzbieta looked stunning, even in simple morning attire. Silk robe, hair loosely tied, eyes shadowed with fatigue. Yet beneath her grace, Poirot sensed tension, as tight as a string pulled too taut. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted, voice wavering ever so slightly. "I was told you wished to examine my suite." Poirot bowed politely. "A mere formality, madame. We seek clarity in all corners." She stepped aside, allowing them entry. Her suite was luxurious. Crimson drapes, ornate lamps, and a large dressing table brimming with perfumes, powders, and handwritten notes. A violin case lay open on the bed, its velvet interior gleaming. Poirot circled the room with slow precision, every movement deliberate. "You knew Maestro Lewandowski well?" he asked. "Since I was 17, she replied softly. "He was my mentor, my anchor." Poirot flicked a glance toward her. "And lately?" She stiffened. "We had disagreements. He was stubborn, afraid of change, but I respected him deeply." Poirot nodded, neither agreeing nor challenging. His eyes drifted to the wardrobe, where a sliver of red silk peeked out between coats. He approached, examining the gown from last night, its hem torn slightly. He touched the frayed edge. "Madame, did something catch upon your dress last night?" Her eyes widened. I do not recall. Perhaps backstage. It was crowded." Poirot hummed, storing the reaction away. He next examined the dressing table. Among the perfume bottles, his gaze settled on a small vial of jasmine scent, the same floral note he had detected in the maestro's dressing room. Gently, he lifted it. "A lovely fragrance." Elzbieta smiled faintly. "A gift from Andrzej. He insisted it suited me." Poirot exchanged a subtle glance with Jaworski. and you wore it last night." She hesitated. "Just a little. Why?" Poirot replaced the bottle without a word. The letter rack on her table held several envelopes. Poirot flicked through them until he found one embossed with the same pattern as the threatening letter found in Lewandowski's drawer. Elżbieta reached forward quickly. "Those are personal." Poirot held up a hand. "Simply observing, madame. You understand." Her breathing had grown shallow. Hastings noticed it too, but said nothing. Poirot's inspection was swift yet thorough, and as they prepared to leave, he turned to Elżbieta. "One more question, madame. Did you visit the maestro backstage after the first act?" She froze. Even her pulse seemed to pause. Briefly. He wanted to discuss the finale tempo. It was nothing important." Poirot's eyes glimmered. But it was important enough to visit him during a performance." Elżbieta's voice dropped. "I did not harm him, Monsieur Poirot. You must believe me." Poirot bowed lightly. "I believe you care very much about what others think, madame. That is all." They left her trembling in the doorway. The next suite belonged to Maestro Andrzej Korecki. He opened the door with a broad grin and an air of theatrical confidence, greeting them as though welcoming honoured guests to a gala. His room was as chaotic as Elżbieta's was refined. Papers scattered, a piano in the corner with open scores, coffee cups abandoned haphazardly, and a cracked violin rosin dish on the floor. "Gentlemen," Korecki exclaimed, "come in, come in! I heard you are hunting ghosts or murderers or something equally dramatic." Poirot smiled mildly. "We seek facts, monsieur. Drama tends to obscure them." Korecki laughed. "Then you may find nothing here." Yet Poirot already had. His eyes darted to the coat rack, where a dark overcoat hung, its sleeve covered in faint white chalk dust. Poirot touched the residue. Chalk, identical to that found backstage. "You were backstage after the concert?" Poirot asked casually. Korecki shrugged. "Briefly, I was looking for Elżbieta. She vanished after the final bow." Poirot tapped his fingers together. "You care for her deeply." Korecki's voice sobered. "Yes, and she was drifting away. The maestro disapproved. He always disapproved." Poirot turned. "Enough to send threats." Korecki blinked. Surprised, too surprised. "Threats? What do you mean?" But Poirot observed the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the slight tremor in his hand. Guilt? Fear? Or simple agitation? Poirot continued surveying the room. Sheet music lay crumpled everywhere, but one page caught his attention. A torn scrap matching the missing portion found in Lewandowski's drawer. Its notes were scribbled angrily. Hairstyles of ink strokes slashed across the page. Poirot lifted it. "You and the maestro collaborated on this composition." Korecki scoffed. "Collaborated? He stole my ideas, passed them off as his own. Everyone thinks he was a genius, but he fed off younger talent." His voice had grown sharp, bitter. "Ask anyone." Poirot set the paper down. "And yet, despite this resentment, you claim to have no ill will toward him?" Korecki clenched his jaw. "Resentment does not equal murder. Remember that, Poirot." Poirot bowed his head. "I remember everything, monsieur." They were nearly at the door when Hastings nudged Poirot, whispering, "Look!" On Korecki's bedside table lay a small metal case, a portable vial used by stagehands for chemical preparations. Poirot opened it delicately. Inside was a faint trace of crystalline powder. Jaworski inhaled sharply. "Is that—" "No!" Poirot interrupted. "Not poison. Stage pigment, used to treat props or touch up markings." He closed the case. "But it places Monsieur Korecki somewhere near the rehearsal stage earlier yesterday." Poirot thanked the maestro for his time and the investigators stepped back into the corridor. Hastings exhaled heavily. Both of them seemed to be hiding something. Poirot nodded. Yes, Hastings, but one hides guilt, the other hides pain. Jaworski frowned. And which is which? Poirot adjusted his gloves. That, Inspector, is the heart of our mystery, and hearts are complicated instruments. They moved toward the lift. Poirot paused one last time, glancing back at the two suite doors standing silently across from each other. Between these two rooms, he murmured, lies a truth wrapped in jealousy, ambition, and fear. But there is another presence. Someone unseen, someone whose steps leave no music. Hastings swallowed. You mean the mysterious chalk footprint stranger? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oui. And until we identify that shadow, none of our suspects may rest, nor shall I. The lift doors slid shut, swallowing them in their quiet descent, as the tension of the investigation deepened like a darkening symphony, its crescendo yet to come. Chapter 5. The Letter in the Snow. The snow thickened over Warsaw by late afternoon, turning the city's avenues into white corridors of quiet contemplation. Poirot stood at the window of his hotel room, watching the flakes drift in delicate spirals. Each one unique, each one falling with purpose. He pressed a fingertip to the cold glass, deep in thought. Hastings, he murmured without turning, murder is like the winter. It blankets the truth, hides the footprints, and forces one to search beneath the surface. Hastings sprawled on the armchair with a newspaper, folded it reluctantly. Poirot, the conductor of the Warsaw Philharmonic, says the maestro's final composition held a coded message. Do you think that's possible? Poirot smiled faintly. Art often contains secrets, but whether intentional or accidental, we must discover. A knock interrupted their conversation. Poirot opened the door to find a trembling hotel bellboy holding a sealed envelope. Monsieur Poirot, the boy stammered, this was left at the reception for you. No name, only a request to deliver it at once. Poirot accepted the envelope delicately, turning it over. The paper was the same brand as the threatening letter found in Lewandowski's dressing room, embossed with the signature pattern of the Royal Warsaw Suites. Hastings leaned closer. Open it, old chap. Poirot broke the seal with controlled precision. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. No handwriting, only typed words. The maestro's death is not what you think. You are searching the wrong rooms. Find the truth in the snow. There was no signature, but a faint smudge of ink in one corner formed a blurred symbol, something like half an initial, half a stamp. Poirot tapped the paper thoughtfully. Someone wishes to guide us, or misguide us. Jaworski, summoned by telephone, arrived moments later, irritation already building. More games, he snapped. Poirot handed him the letter. Games, perhaps, but every game has rules, and every rule reveals a truth. Minutes later, the three men made their way outside into the freezing dusk. The letter's cryptic instruction, find the truth in the snow, seemed intentionally vague, yet Poirot had deduced a direction. The concert hall's rear courtyard is always dusted with snow this time of year, he said. Few use it, except stagehands taking deliveries. If one wished to conceal a meeting or exchange, that is where the footprints might survive. Hastings shivered. Let's hope our murderer enjoys cold weather. The courtyard behind the Warsaw Concert Hall lay silent beneath a fresh layer of snow, glowing faintly under dim lanterns. Poirot scanned the area with deliberate calm, her eyes narrowed. Behold, Hastings, he said at last, pointing to a set of half-covered prints. 2 pairs of feet, one heavy astride, one light. Jaworski knelt to inspect. "These are from last night, before the snow deepened." Poirot nodded. "And the smaller prints, they show hesitation, perhaps fear. They approach the service door but do not enter." Hastings frowned. "Could they belong to Elzbieta?" Poirot raised a finger. "You assume. Never assume. These prints could belong to any woman, or a man with small steps. We must follow." He traced the trail slowly, bending often to study impressions. The second set of prints, the heavier stride, intersected with the smaller ones, circled around them, and continued toward the alley behind the opera house. "A meeting," Poirot murmured, "not an accidental crossing. Someone approached the other person here, perhaps summoned or cornered them." The smaller footprints abruptly stopped by a bench near the alley entrance. Poirot crouched, brushing away snow until a faint indentation appeared on the wooden slats. A rectangular shape. "A box," he said softly, "or perhaps a small case." Hastings blinked. "Jewellery." Poirot shook his head. "Sheet music, or a portable metronome case, perhaps." Jaworski exhaled sharply. "So someone exchanged something with the maestro's visitor." Poirot rose, brushing his knees. "Or returned, something stolen." As they continued, Poirot noticed a thin glint near the brick wall, a silver object half buried. With gloved fingers, he extracted a small, elegant brooch shaped like a lyre. "This," Poirot breathed, "belonged to the Warsaw Conservatory's graduate class 10 years ago, a gift to their top performer." Hastings gasped softly. "Elzbieta." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, but look, this clasp is bent, torn away, not placed." Jaworski groaned. "This incriminates her." Poirot's eyes flashed sharply. "No, this tells me only that she was here, or someone who wanted us to think so." He turned the brooch over. On the back, faint scratches formed initials nearly invisible to the naked eye. A.K. Hastings stiffened. "Andrei Koretsky." Poirot closed his fingers around the brooch, a shared symbol of their past, a gift between protégés, perhaps given or taken. Jaworski's voice lowered, or dropped during a struggle. Poirot turned to face them. "A struggle did occur. The prints indicate abrupt movement. See how the smaller steps slide? Someone was pulled or startled, but no signs of violence, only panic." He stepped back, letting the wind brush fresh snow across the scene. If our mysterious correspondent wished us to see this, they knew the snow would soon bury these clues. They acted quickly. They are close to us. As the three men retreated toward the concert hall, Poirot paused by the service door. "Observe," he said, pointing to a faint smear near the handle. "A streak of pale residue. Chalk again. The same used backstage. Our unknown visitor was there earlier, and here after the performance." Hastings frowned. "Then the chalk footprint stranger is tied to this meeting?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed. And they were not one of the musicians. This chalk is the kind used by stagehands, carpenters, or prop assistants. A person invisible to the glamorous world above them." Back in the warmth of the foyer, Poirot stopped beneath a lamp, turning the brooch between his fingers as though it were a precious gem. "Hastings," he said gently, "note how the brooch clasp is bent inward, not outward. This means it was torn away by someone grabbing the person, not by the person pulling free." Hastings widened his eyes. "So someone seized Elzbieta, or someone wearing her brooch?" Poirot's gaze hardened. "Precisely." Jaworski leaned forward. "Poirot, do you suspect Koretsky?" Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "No. His temperament is loud, emotional, chaotic, but this," he held up the brooch, "belongs to someone patient, someone who plans with care. Koretsky reacts. This murderer strategizes." Hastings asked quietly, "Then who, Poirot?" Poirot looked at both men, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There is a third suspect, one who has not yet spoken, nor been named, someone who moves in silence, someone who hides in plain sight. The wind outside howled against the concert hall walls as if echoing his words. And now, Poirot continued softly, the snow has given us our first glimpse of them. A long silence followed, a silence thick with tension, like the moment before a conductor raises his baton. The investigation had now reached its second movement. A darker one. Chapter 6. Shadows Behind the Stage. The next morning, Hercule Poirot returned to the Warsaw Concert Hall with a precise calm that contrasted sharply with the restless police officers moving in and out of the backstage corridors. The hall felt different at dawn, emptier, colder, as though the music that once lived inside had retreated into the very walls, hiding from the truth that now threatened to expose it. The great bronze doors groaned as Poirot pushed them open, his polished shoes clicking softly on the mosaic floors. Every sound echoed strangely, as if the building itself whispered fragments of the night of the murder. Commissar Lewandowski awaited him by the stage, his hat tucked under one arm and his moustache drooping in exhaustion. Poirot offered a polite nod before walking past him, his eyes immediately narrowing as he took in the stage where Ilya had played his final note. The piano remained where it had stood, covered by a black cloth, and yet Poirot felt as though the instrument still hummed faintly with the ghost of Ilya's performance. He circled it slowly, fingertips gliding over the cloth, pausing at the bench, then the pedals. A curious thing, this death, Poirot murmured, kneeling to inspect the underside of the bench. Everyone sees, everyone hears, yet no one truly observes. That, my friend, is what separates a mystery from the truth. Lewandowski frowned, unsure if Poirot was talking to him or the empty theatre. Poirot continued his quiet search, his eyes sharp as razors. When he lifted the cloth from the piano, he noticed something faint on the polished wood, tiny specks of dust disturbed in a place that should have been immaculate. Someone had leaned over it after the performance. Someone who should not have. He moved backstage, where the shadows were longer and the air smelled faintly of varnish, old costumes, and unseen secrets. The dressing rooms were lined in a row, each door marked with the performer's name, though some plaques hung crooked as though disturbed. Poirot paused at Ilya Voronin's dressing room. The door was still sealed with police tape, but he was granted entry. Inside, the space was small, almost ascetic. A mirror framed by light bulbs dominated the wall, reflecting a simple table, an empty teacup, a metronome, and a sheet of music scattered with hurried pencil notations. Poirot examined the sheet closely. The notations were frantic, almost panicked, nothing like the precise, elegant handwriting of a perfectionist pianist. Someone had scribbled these in haste. He searched the drawers next, finding only a few personal effects. Cufflinks, a ticket stub from a Paris competition, and a single letter folded neatly beneath a linen handkerchief. Poirot opened it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, unmistakably feminine. The letter read, "If you insist on revealing the truth during the concert, you will destroy everything, not only for yourself, but for all of us." There was no signature. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Ah, this, I believe, is what one calls a threat, n'est-ce pas?" Lewandowski read over his shoulder, grimacing. "Could be from any of the suspects," he muttered, "or from someone we haven't even considered yet." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. And yet, the voice in this letter, it has a tone of familiarity, of desperation. It is written by someone who feared the exposure of a very particular secret." Leaving the dressing room, Poirot visited the orchestra pit, where the shadows pooled more heavily than anywhere else. The pit was still cluttered with music stands and chairs left from rehearsal, though one chair stood slightly apart from the others. He knelt to inspect it and noticed a faint scratch on the floor beneath it, as though it had been dragged recently. That wouldn't be unusual, except for the fact that it stood too far from its designated section. Poirot touched the ground beneath the chair and found a small object wedged between the floorboards. A broken fragment of a cufflink. He pocketed it silently. The next phase of his investigation led him to the technical balcony, a narrow gallery overlooking the hall. The wooden boards creaked ominously beneath his weight. The lighting equipment was still in place, though Poirot immediately noticed that one of the maintenance hatches had been recently opened and forcibly shut again. He knelt and inspected the latch, noticing tool marks, fresh ones. Someone had hidden something there or retrieved it. When Lewandowski popped his head in to check on him, Poirot held up a hand. "Do not disturb the little grey cells when they are working, my friend." He carefully pried open the hatch and retrieved a small velvet pouch coated with dust. Inside were two items: a vial containing residue of a clear liquid and a folded program from Ilya's final concert, with two corners torn sharply. Poirot studied the vial, rolling it between his fingers. A drug, perhaps, or poison, but used how, and by whom? The questions spiraled thoughtfully in his mind. Returning to the main floor, Poirot allowed himself a moment to stand at the centre of the empty hall. He pictured the audience, the applause, the tension in the air. He imagined each suspect's face illuminated by the golden chandeliers. Elena, the jealous protégé; Anton, the conductor with a bruised ego; Marcel, the financier with a hidden grudge; Lydia, the opera diva with a secret past; and Viktor, the stagehand who knew the underground workings of the hall better than any detective. Poirot whispered softly, One of you stood close enough to ask Ilya Voronin to end his life without lifting a weapon. How curious! How delicate! How precise!" He walked toward the side exit, where a narrow staircase spiraled downward into the storage rooms. The descent was dimly lit, and the air grew colder as he went deeper. In the lowest corridor, a flickering bulb cast a sickly light over rows of crates and forgotten props. Poirot examined each area carefully, eventually stopping before a crate marked Fragile, Musical Apparatus. Inside he found discarded tuning tools and a set of gloves with a faint chemical scent. Beside the crate lay footprints, small, narrow, clearly belonging to someone with a light step. A woman, perhaps, or a slender man. Poirot bent to examine them. The prints overlapped in a muddled pattern. The culprit had moved quickly, nervously. The chapter closed with Poirot standing alone in the cold basement corridor, holding the velvet pouch in one hand and the threatening letter in the other. His eyes narrowed, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. "The truth," he whispered, "is playing its own melody, and soon it will crescendo." Above him, a distant thud echoed from the stage, as though someone unseen had slammed a door. Someone who did not wish for him to discover what had truly happened to Ilya Voronin. Chapter 7. The Web Tightens. That evening, as the lamps of Warsaw flickered awake and cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets, Hercule Poirot sat in his modest hotel room overlooking the Vistula River, studying the evidence he had gathered. The velvet pouch he found in the technical balcony lay open before him, the small vial glinting under the warm glow of the desk lamp. He turned it slowly between his fingers, watching the residue cling to the glass, like the last traces of a secret not yet fully confessed. Poirot's mind replayed every detail of the concert night. The performance, the collapse, the panic, the suspicious glances, and the deafening silence that followed. Every suspect had been within reach of Ilya Voronin. But opportunity alone was not enough. The motive had to be sharp, personal, and compelling. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, letting the little grey cells hum in quiet symphony. Something about this vial, this letter, and the disturbed piano surface connected to a single person, someone who had known precisely how to strike without being seen. Early the next morning, Poirot returned to the concert hall for private questioning, beginning with Elena Dubrovsky, Ilya's loyal yet resentful protégée. She stood by the stage, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes shimmering with a grief she attempted to hide beneath indifference. Poirot approached her gently, offering a polite bow. "Mademoiselle, your mentor was a man of precision, yet someone with equal precision used that familiarity against him." Elena's jaw tightened, and her fingers trembled slightly. Poirot noticed. "Tell me," he continued, "what was your relationship with Ilya in the days leading to the concert?" She hesitated before replying, strained. He was avoiding rehearsals with me. He said I needed to learn independence." Her voice cracked. Poirot studied her closely. "And the letter threatening him. Do you recognize the handwriting?" Elena's breath caught, but she shook her head. "No, I would never threaten him, even if he was difficult." Poirot stepped closer to the piano where she had been standing. "Yet, mademoiselle, you were one of the few who knew the piano intimately. If poison were applied to the keys, you would surely have noticed something amiss, yes?" Her eyes widened at the implication. "Poison? Is that how he died?" Poirot did not answer, but the fear that crossed her face did not seem feigned. Still, fear could coexist with guilt. Next, Poirot summoned Anton Radek, the passionate conductor whose pride had been wounded by Ilya's refusal to acknowledge his creative direction. Anton entered the room with restless energy, pacing before Poirot could even greet him. "Detective, this is madness," he huffed. "The police are sniffing around as if I had something to gain." Poirot glanced at him with calm amusement. "But, monsieur, you did have something to gain. A triumphant concert conducted by you, unmarred by scandal. Yet instead, it was overshadowed by tragedy." Anton stopped pacing. "You think I tampered with the performance? With the piano? Impossible! I didn't go near it after rehearsal." Poirot tapped his finger to his chin. "But the programme found in the balcony. 2 corners torn precisely. Yours was missing from your dressing room." Anton stiffened. "I dropped mine. I carry too many papers." His excuses dissolved under Poirot's unwavering gaze. "Monsieur, this crime required finesse, not clumsiness," Poirot said. "But one must ask, why does a conductor need a drug vial hidden above the hall?" Anton's face reddened. "Drug? What drug? I know nothing of it." Poirot believed him partly, but Anton's temper, volatile and sharp, could not be dismissed. Poirot then turned his attention to Marcel Nowicki, the wealthy patron whose financial ties to the concert hall ran deeper than most knew. Marcel greeted Poirot with overly warm politeness, offering tea and forced smiles. Poirot accepted neither. "Monsieur Nowicki," he began, "Ilya was about to reveal a truth that would destroy someone connected to this establishment." Marcel's smile faltered. "Detective, you are mistaken. Ilya was a brilliant artist, but prone to dramatics." Poirot lifted the threatening letter. "This is not drama. This is fear." Marcel swallowed. "I funded Ilya's European tour. If he had exposed some scandal, my reputation would have suffered, yes, but murder? I would never risk such a thing. Poirot eyed him carefully. The gloves found in the basement, monsieur. They bore chemical traces, chemicals used in certain financial forgeries. Marcel's face drained of colour. Forgery? Detective, please, you must understand, my past is complicated, but that has nothing to do with Ilya's death. Poirot said nothing, but the man's sudden panic was telling. His next visit was to Lydia Beale. The opera diva, whose voice was as commanding as her secrets, were well guarded. Lydia appeared in a rich velvet gown, even this early in the day, her presence as dramatic as any performance. She regarded Poirot with disdain. Monsieur Poirot, must we do this now? I respected Ilya, but I have a rehearsal in an hour. Poirot inclined his head. A rehearsal can wait when death has taken centre stage. Lydia bristled. Poirot continued. You were one of the last to speak with Ilya before he died. Witnesses say your argument was heated. Her eyes flashed. It was personal, but arguments do not equal murder. Poirot stepped closer. Your shoe prints were found in the basement storage area, near a crate of tuning tools. She blinked rapidly. I get lost backstage. The hall is confusing. A lie, Poirot immediately knew. But whether it was the lie of a murderer or simply a woman hiding an unrelated sin remained uncertain. Finally, Poirot met with Viktor Kraus, the quiet stagehand whose presence often went unnoticed. Viktor sat on a crate, polishing a lantern, eyes avoiding Poirot. You know this building better than anyone, Poirot began. You know every hatch, every backstage path, every blind spot. Viktor shrugged. It's my job. Poirot held up the broken cufflink fragment. You also know who this belongs to. Victor's hands stilled. I don't know. Many men wear cufflinks. Poirot leaned in, but only one wore a set engraved with a subtle V-shaped pattern. I saw them on you the night of the performance. Victor's face tightened. I lost one a week ago. Poirot lifted a brow. Or last night. Viktor stood abruptly. A guilty man might run, yet Viktor remained still, trembling. Something about his fear felt genuine, not cunning. Detective, I didn't kill anyone, he whispered, but I saw something, someone. Poirot straightened immediately. Who? Viktor swallowed hard, sweat beading at his temple. Someone near the balcony after the performance, someone who shouldn't have been there. Poirot waited. Victor's voice dropped. It was Elena. Poirot left him in silence, his mind whirring. The clues tightened around the suspects like a constricting web. Each had motive, each had opportunity, each hid something. But only one had been seen where the poisoned truth had been concealed. As he stepped into the dim light of the stage, Poirot knew the moment had come. The investigation was no longer a question of who could have killed Ilya Voronin, but who had dared to think they could outwit Hercule Poirot. Chapter 8. The Hidden Witness. Night had fallen over Warsaw, wrapping the streets in an icy silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of carriage wheels and the faint hum of a distant tram. Poirot walked slowly along the riverfront, hands clasped behind his back, the small velvet pouch and the threatening letter still fresh in his mind. The snow from the previous day had begun to melt, leaving behind slushy impressions that reminded him that time, like footprints, could distort the truth. Yet footprints remained, the traces of the guilty and the fearful alike. Poirot's intuition whispered that the answers were closer than anyone suspected, but the path to them required patience. The city itself seemed to pulse with secrets, every shadow a potential witness, every flickering lantern a herald of revelation. Returning to the Warsaw Concert Hall, Poirot insisted on a late-night inspection. The hall was eerily quiet, the chandeliers unlit, and the stage draped in darkness. He moved with deliberate care, noting the subtle creaks in the floorboards that betrayed prior movement. Somewhere backstage, perhaps hidden in the shadows, someone had been watching, perhaps waiting. Poirot's eyes scanned the empty corridors, his instincts sharp. He stopped near the narrow service door leading to the orchestra pit, recalling the footprints he had traced days before. The chalk residue on the floor still hinted at the movements of the mysterious visitor. Poirot crouched, examining the faint traces. They were erratic, stopping, retreating, circling as if the person had been nervous or attempting to mislead an observer. His mind raced, aligning these new impressions with the statements and alibis of the suspects. Poirot's attention shifted to the piano, its polished black surface reflecting the dim moonlight filtering through high windows. The bench was slightly askew, as if recently used. On the floor, half hidden beneath a stage curtain, lay another small fragment of a cufflink, identical in design to the one previously found in the basement. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, so our suspect is careless in layers," he murmured. "Or perhaps too confident in the belief that no one watches the unseen corners." He rose and moved to the stage wings, noting the storage of spare instruments and props. A small door at the far end of the wing, a hatch used for lighting access, was ajar. Poirot approached silently, glancing at the metal handle that bore faint scratches. This had been opened recently, and with purpose. He opened the door slowly, revealing a narrow stairway leading to a dimly lit alcove above the stage. The alcove overlooked the orchestra pit, a perfect vantage for observation. A stool and a small lantern were still present, and on the floor he found a crumpled sheet of music with annotations in a feminine hand. Poirot held it under the weak light, turning the page carefully. The markings indicated precise knowledge of Ilya's movements, timing, phrasing, even the tempo of his final note. As Poirot examined the notes, he heard a faint rustle behind him. He turned swiftly, hand extended, as though already anticipating confrontation, and saw a shadow disappear behind a curtain. Without hesitation he followed, his small frame moving like a cat in the silence of the hall. He reached the far side of the stage, discovering a hidden corridor leading to the costume storage. There, half concealed behind racks of dresses, was a small bundle, a figure shivering, eyes wide with terror. Poirot approached cautiously. "Fear not, mademoiselle, I am not here to harm you." The figure hesitated, then slowly rose. It was Elena Dubrovsky. Her eyes darted nervously, tears streaming down her face. "Monsieur Poirot, I tried. I didn't mean to." Poirot raised a calming hand. "Tell me everything, and all will become clear. The truth, no matter how frightening, must be faced." She sank to the floor, trembling. Her voice shook as she confessed, "I saw it. I saw who did it. The night of the concert, after the first act, I witnessed someone near Ilya's piano, someone who was not supposed to be there, applying something to the keys." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you did not inform anyone?" Elena shook her head violently. I was afraid. The person, they threatened me, said I would be next if I spoke." Poirot nodded. Fear could be as telling as guilt. "And this person, can you describe them?" Elena's voice faltered. I could see the coat, dark, tailored, gloves, and a faint scent of jasmine." Poirot's eyes gleamed. He knew the fragrance. It was the same found in Lewandowski's dressing room, the same subtle note noted during his visit to Elzbieta's suite. "Ah, mademoiselle, this aligns with our earlier observations. You have been courageous, but cautious. Very well." Elena explained further. The perpetrator had used her knowledge of the hall's secret passages to move unseen. They had timed their actions meticulously, ensuring no one in the audience or orchestra would notice. Poirot noted each detail carefully. The pauses, the hesitant steps, the glances to ensure she was not observing too closely. Everything she described corroborated the chalk footprints, the displaced piano bench, and the fragmented cufflinks. Poirot listened without interruption, absorbing each nuance like a conductor following a complex score. He observed how her hands shook not from guilt, but from terror and moral conflict. "You are not the guilty one," he said softly. "You are a witness trapped in silence." He led Elena from her hiding place, moving through the backstage corridors with deliberate care. Each step was calculated to avoid further disturbance, yet the tension in the air was palpable. Poirot pondered the list of suspects anew, narrowing his focus. The clues now pointed to someone precise, patient, and intimately familiar with both the hall and its inhabitants. The scent of jasmine, the meticulous timing, the use of hidden spaces, all signs of careful planning. Yet the perpetrator had underestimated Elena, whose courage, though hesitant, had become the key to unraveling the final act. By the time they emerged into the cool night air, Poirot felt a renewed certainty. He stopped, gazing at the concert hall towering behind them. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you have done well to come forward. Your testimony brings us closer to justice." Elena, still trembling, whispered, "Monsieur Poirot, will they be caught?" Poirot's lips curved in a small, enigmatic smile. "Patience. The music is not yet complete, but soon the final note will sound, and all shall be revealed." The night remained still, but the city seemed alive with anticipation. In the shadows of the hall, in the hidden corridors above the stage, the perpetrator, unseen, confident, and meticulous, continued to breathe. They had made one miscalculation, underestimating the courage of a single witness. Poirot's mind raced, arranging the pieces like notes in a fugue. Soon, the entire composition of treachery, jealousy, and obsession would be laid bare. And somewhere in the frozen streets of Warsaw, the murderer would begin to feel the first tremors of discovery. Chapter 9. The confrontation. The morning air in Warsaw was crisp, almost biting, as Poirot walked purposefully toward the concert hall, his mind alive with the threads of the case that had been slowly converging. Every clue collected, every confession and observation made, had led him to a single inescapable truth. Elena's trembling testimony the previous night had illuminated the path. Someone who knew the hidden corridors and had moved with deliberate precision, someone who possessed both motive and access, was the orchestrator of Ilya Voronin's death. Poirot's small frame moved with quiet authority through the cobblestone streets, a figure entirely out of place in the bustling city, yet completely in command of the invisible currents that carried the truth toward him. He had a plan, a precise method for bringing the suspect into the open, and nothing, neither fear nor snow nor shadow, would deter him. Upon entering the hall, Poirot summoned Lewandowski and Elena to a secluded side corridor. The Commissar looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot as Poirot laid out his intentions. "We shall host a small gathering," Poirot said, his tone calm but commanding. "All the suspects will be present. And here, in this room, We shall observe reactions, subtle movements, and the smallest deviations in behavior. You see, my friend, the guilty conscience cannot hide, not even for a moment." Lewandowski's eyes widened. "A trap?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A symphony of revelation, yes, and it will be conducted by my own understanding of human nature." He gestured for Elena to remain discreet, and she nodded, trembling but resolute. The room was prepared. A small, elegant chamber, adjacent to the main stage, with clear sightlines to the backstage corridors and stage wings. Chairs were arranged with precision, and a low table held refreshments, though Poirot suspected no one would touch them. Soon, one by one, the suspects arrived. Anton Radek, the conductor, entered first, his expression a mixture of impatience and feigned confidence. Marcel Nowicki, the financier, followed, his movements controlled, masking anxiety beneath civility. Lydia Biel, the diva, glided in with poise, yet her eyes flickered nervously toward the stage. Finally, Elena Dubrovsky entered, discreetly taking a corner seat where she would remain unseen. Poirot observed each carefully, noting posture, gestures, and the smallest shifts of gaze. As the suspects settled, Poirot began speaking slowly, deliberately, each word measured to elicit the reactions he sought. "Mesdames et messieurs, we gather this morning not merely to discuss music, but to confront the truth. Ilya Voronin's death was not an accident, nor was it the product of chaos. It was deliberate. And the person responsible moved with care, knowledge, and patience. Only someone intimately familiar with this hall, with its hidden corridors, could commit such a precise act." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Anton's fingers tapped nervously against his leg. Lydia's hand clenched the arm of her chair. Marcel's eyes shifted between Poirot and the closed door. Poirot continued, lifting the velvet pouch in one hand. This vial, discovered in the balcony above the stage, contained a substance intended to incapacitate, to ensure that Ilya Voronin's final note could be silenced. The small cufflink fragments found in the basement and the broken clasp discovered in the snow outside point to one who underestimated human vigilance, and yet they were careful, meticulous, patient, until they were seen by a witness who feared only for her life. His gaze fell on Elena. She shrank slightly in her seat, but Poirot's eyes encouraged courage. "And so," Poirot said, turning slowly to face the suspects, "the question is not who had motive, for all of you did, nor opportunity, for all of you could have moved unseen. No, the question is who combined both with cunning and secrecy." His voice rose, filled with dramatic clarity. "The answer is revealed not through accusation, but by the subtle betrayals of conscience. Observe, mesdames et messieurs, the smallest signs of guilt." He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Lydia Biel, whose composure faltered. Her fingers trembled, her breathing quickened, and her gaze darted repeatedly toward the floor. Poirot's sharp eyes noted every twitch, every micro-expression. He reached into his pocket, producing a sheet of music, one Elena had discovered in the hidden alcove. "This music," he explained, "contains annotations made in haste, in a manner inconsistent with Ilya's own handwriting. The markings reveal timing, phrasing, and a detailed knowledge of his movements, applied not by passion or performance, but by intent. Observe the handwriting, and you shall see the same hand that touched the threatening letter delivered to me." Lydia's lips parted slightly, and her eyes widened. A bead of sweat traced her temple. Poirot moved closer. "The scent of jasmine, a detail overlooked, yet preserved, led us to you. You believed your elegance and precision would shield your guilt, but elegance cannot disguise a conscience that quivers." Lydia rose abruptly, her voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, I did it! Ilya, he was going to ruin me. He discovered the truth of my past, my family scandal, my debts, my secret dependence on the financier's favours. If he had revealed it during the concert, my career, my life, everything would have been destroyed. I only meant to frighten him. But—" Her voice broke, and she sank into a chair, sobbing. Poirot's expression softened but remained resolute. "Mademoiselle, justice demands clarity. You moved with care, yes, but the law will now move against you." Marcel clenched his fists, Anton's jaw dropped, and even Elena allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Lewandowski stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Lydia did not resist, though the tears continued to fall. Poirot observed silently, noting the contrast between the outward show of elegance and the inward turmoil of a guilty conscience. "This," he said finally, addressing the room, "is the culmination of human passions. Envy, fear, ambition, executed with subtlety and concealed by the art of music itself, but the truth, as always, reveals itself to those who know how to watch, listen, and reason." As Lydia was led away, Poirot turned to Elena. "You see, mademoiselle, courage has its own melody, one that the guilty cannot ignore. Your testimony has been indispensable." Elena's eyes shone with gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I feared it was too late." Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "Nothing is ever too late when the truth is concerned. Every note, every shadow, every silence has meaning. One need only attend carefully to hear it." The chapter closed with Poirot standing at the centre of the hall, moonlight spilling across the stage, reflecting off the polished piano. In that stillness, he imagined Ilya Voronin, his final note lingering in the air, a requiem for justice restored, and a reminder that even in the darkest deeds, clarity and observation would always prevail. Chapter 10. The Final Note. The dawn in Warsaw was pale, filtered through clouds that hung low over the city, as if the sky itself bore witness to the resolution of events that had shaken the concert hall to its very foundations. Hercule Poirot walked slowly through the empty streets, his coat drawn tightly around him against the chill, each step measured and deliberate. In his mind, the case had reached its final movement, a symphony of motives, missteps, and hidden truths that now culminated in clarity. The city seemed quieter than usual, as though it held its breath for the justice that was to be delivered. And Poirot, ever the orchestrator of reason, felt the weight of every detail coalesced into a single undeniable conclusion. Upon arrival at the concert hall, Poirot was greeted by Commissar Lewandowski, whose expression was a mixture of relief and lingering doubt. "The murderer is in custody," Lewandowski began, his voice subdued, "but I cannot help but feel there is more to understand." Poirot nodded, his eyes sweeping the familiar stage, the hidden alcoves, and the orchestra pit where every step had been calculated. "Indeed, my friend, the mind of the guilty is never a simple one. One must observe, deduce, and reconcile the subtle interplay of human passions. Yet, the final note, the one that completes the symphony, is always truth." Poirot moved toward the piano, now uncovered and polished, its black surface reflecting the soft morning light. He ran his fingers lightly across the keys, imagining Ilya Voronin's final performance. The touch was delicate, precise, as though he could summon the echoes of genius long silenced. Poirot called Elena Dubrovsky to his side, instructing her to recount the details of what she had observed. She spoke quietly but clearly, describing the hidden passages, the timing of the murderer's movements, and the precise placement of the viol. Poirot listened intently, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Every detail confirmed his suspicions. The perpetrator had relied on a combination of technical knowledge of the hall and intimate understanding of the victim's habits. It had been meticulous, patient, and cunning, but not infallible. Elena's courage in coming forward, despite her fear, had been the fulcrum upon which justice would pivot. Poirot nodded gently. "Mademoiselle, you see the music of truth unfolds in layers. The faintest tremor, the smallest note, can reveal the entire composition of deceit." Next, Poirot convened the remaining witnesses and suspects in the main hall, its vast emptiness emphasizing the gravity of the occasion. Anton Radek, Marcel Nowicki, and the few staff who had remained present gathered reluctantly, each one aware that the culmination of the investigation demanded transparency. Poirot addressed them with calm authority, recounting the sequence of events from the final rehearsal to the moment Ilya collapsed at the piano. He spoke of the velvet pouch, the vial, the cufflink fragments, and the handwritten annotations on the music sheets. Each revelation was accompanied by precise observation, showing how the small, seemingly inconsequential details, footprints, scent, a glance, had led to the identification of the guilty party. As Poirot's narration continued, Lydia Biel, the opera diva who had been under arrest, was brought before the Dio assembly. Her composure had returned partially, though her hands still trembled faintly. Poirot explained how the combination of motive, access, and execution had aligned with her actions, and how the threatening letter, once anonymous, had been traced to her unique handwriting. He revealed how the faint scent of jasmine, overlooked by all, had marked her as the individual who had applied the incapacitating substance to the piano keys, ensuring Ilya's silence during his final note. The hall seemed to hold its breath as Poirot's words unfolded, each accusation precise and undeniable. Lydia's face paled as Poirot presented the final piece of evidence. The alignment of the footprints, the position of the piano bench, and the discovery of the small sheet music in the hidden alcove. All these elements, Poirot stated, speak of a calculated plan, executed with care, but ultimately flawed by overconfidence and oversight. Even the most meticulous hand cannot hide the truth from observation. Lydia sank into a chair, her voice trembling. I was afraid he would destroy me, ruin everything I had built. Poirot's expression softened slightly. Fear does not justify murder, mademoiselle. Yet understanding it allows one to see the full measure of human frailty. Your guilt is now clear, and justice will follow its course. With the case publicly clarified, the atmosphere in the concert hall shifted. Relief mingled with residual tension, and those present absorbed the weight of events that had unfolded behind the closed doors. Poirot took a moment to walk to the center of the stage, standing beneath the chandeliers that had illuminated so many performances. He allowed himself a private reflection. Ilya Voronin's final note, while silenced prematurely, had left an indelible mark, a reminder that brilliance and malice often coexist in the same space. The detective felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that despite tragedy, the symmetry of truth had been restored. Poirot addressed the room one final time, speaking with gentle authority. Mesdames et messieurs, in life, as in music, every action resonates beyond its immediate note. Every choice, every deceit, every act of courage contributes to a greater composition. Today, justice has sounded its final note. The guilty have been confronted, the innocent reassured, and the lessons of observation, deduction, and moral courage preserved. Let this be a reminder that truth, like music, can be delayed distorted or obscured, but it cannot be silenced forever. The day ended with a solemn quiet, as if the concert hall itself had sighed in relief. Poirot lingered briefly by the piano, fingers tracing the keys one last time. He closed the lid gently, leaving the instrument ready for the next performance, the next melody, the next truth to be revealed. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds, casting warm light over the city streets, illuminating the ordinary world that had been so briefly overshadowed by crime and secrecy. Poirot walked slowly back to his hotel, each step deliberate, each thought reflecting on the fragile harmony between human ambition and conscience. Knowing that while the hall was quiet now, the echoes of Ilya Voronin's Final Note and the lessons of courage and observation it inspired would resonate far beyond the stage. And so the mystery of the Warsaw Concert Hall reached its conclusion. The murderer apprehended, the evidence preserved, the witnesses brave, and the music of truth restored. Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, departed with the satisfaction that comes from a case perfectly solved, confident that the harmony of justice had at last been achieved.